is that the way to achieve even greater economic growth, and keep in mind the economy is now growing at a 6% clip, so the question is, when do businesses actually start hiring? Because they're now making a profit. What you're going to start hearing is the only way to provide stability is to go back and do what we'd been doing before the crisis. So I noticed yesterday when we were there was some hearing about our proposal to provide additional financing to small businesses and tax credits to small businesses. Some of our friends on the other side of the aisle said, this won't help at all. What you have to do is to make sure that we continue the tax breaks for wealthiest Americans. That's really what's going to make a difference. Well, if the agenda, if the price of certainty is essentially for us to adopt the exact same proposals that were in place for 8 years leading up to the biggest economic crisis since the Great Depression, we don't tinker with health care, let the insurance companies do what they want, we don't put in place any insurance reforms, we don't mess with the banks, let them keep on doing what they're doing now because we don't want to stir up Wall Street, the result is going to be the same. I don't know why we would expect a different outcome pursuing the exact same policies that got us into this fix in the first place. Michael Bennett articulated it very well. Part of the reason people are feeling anxious right now, it's not just because of this current crisis. They've been going through this for 10 years. They've been working, not seeing a raise. Their costs have been going up. Their spouses going to the workforce. They work as hard as they can. They're barely keeping their heads above water. They're trying to figure out how to retire. They're seeing more and more of their costs on health care dumped in their lap. College tuition skyrockets. They are more and more vulnerable, and they have been for the last decade, treading water. And if our response ends up being, because we don't want to, we don't want to stir things up here, we're just going to do the same thing that was being done before, then I don't know what differentiates us from the other guys. And I don't know why people would say, boy, we really want to make sure that those Democrats are in Washington fighting for us. So the point I'm making, and Blanche is exactly right, we've got to be non-ideological about our approach to these things. We've got to make sure that that our party understands that, like it or not, we have to have a financial system that is healthy and functioning, so we can't be demonizing every bank out there. We've got to be the party of business, small business and large business, because they produce jobs. We've got to be in favor of competition and exports and trade. We don't want to be looking backwards. We can't just go back to the New Deal and try to grab all the same policies of the 1930s and think somehow they'd work in the 21st century. So Blanche is exactly right that sometimes we get ideologically bogged down. I just want to find out what works. And I know you do too. And I know the people in Arkansas do too. But when you're talking to the folks in Arkansas, you also have to remind them what works is not just going back and doing the same things that we were doing before. And yes, there's going to be some transition time. If we have a serious financial regulatory reform package, will the banks squawk? Yes. Will they say this is the reason we're not lending? Yes. The problem is we know right now they're not lending and paying out big bonuses. And we know that the existing regulatory system doesn't work. So we shouldn't be spooked by this notion that, well, is now the time to take seriously, in an intelligent way, not in a knee-jerk way, the challenge of financial regulatory reform so that you don't have banks that are too big to fail, and you're not putting taxpayers at risk, and you're not putting the economy at risk, now's the time to do it. The same is true with health care. The same is true with health care. There are, I promise you, at least as many small businesses out there, if you talk to them, who will say, I just got my bill for my health insurance and it went up 40%. And we've got to do something for them. All right?
Nick.
All right.
Next question, the junior senator from state of New York, Kirsten Gillibrand.
President, I have an issue I'd like
Here, Kristen, we've got a mic for you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have an issue I'd like to raise that is very important to every New Yorker and to many, many Americans. And that's health care for our 9/11 responders and for all the communities that live near Ground Zero. Now, these Americans hail from every one of the 50 states and every single congressional district in the entire United States.
Right. And
now, because of exposure to toxins from the collapse of the World Trade Center towers, there's about 20,000 people who are sick, some of them gravely ill, suffering from serious health effects. Some are disabled, some have died. I've introduced legislation to provide permanent care and proper compensation for these Americans. And my question is, would you today commit to working with Congress to pass a comprehensive 9/11 health bill that's fully paid for?
Well, I fully commit to working with you guys. Keep in mind that our budget already significantly increased funding precisely for this purpose. So I'm not just talking the talk. You know, we've been budgeting this as a top priority for the administration. I confess, Kristen, I have not looked at all the details of your legislation. But I know that not only you and Chuck, but everybody here wants to make sure that those who showed such extraordinary courage and heroism during 9/11, that they are fittingly cared for, and that's going to be something that we are going to be very interested in working with you on. All right,
Thank you, Mr. President.
Good.
The next question is the chairperson of the Environment and Public Works Committee, Senator Barbara Boxer.
Hey, Barbara Boxer.
Great to see you here, Mr. President, and thanks for doing this, and thanks for meeting with the Republican caucus at the House. I thought it was very instructive for the American people. As Senator Feinstein and I tell our colleagues every day, California's hurting. I know that you're aware of that. And they really want to see a fighting spirit in us, that we are committed, even though we've had some political setbacks, to get the job done. And I just want to tell you, as I watched you during the State of the Union, listen to you, what you are doing now is really important to the folks that I represent, because you're showing that fighting spirit no matter what the adversity is, and you're coming up with specific proposals. So I want to ask you about small business. We all know they're the job creators. 64% of new jobs over the last 15 years came from small business. Your new proposal, which does mirror a couple of people, I look at Senator Merkley, I know Senator Warner and others, we've worked hard on this, for community banks to lend. Mm-hmm. Can you do that by executive order? Because my understanding is you can use some of the TARP funds that were paid back and use that, or those funds that have not been used. Can you use that and get this going by executive order, or do you need us to put that program into a jobs bill? And second, are you using your influence as much as you can to get the big banks to lend? They've dropped lending by $12 billion over the last year. So I wonder if you can give us an update on that.
First of all, I've now taken trips to Allentown, Pennsylvania, Elyria, Ohio. Most recently, I was in Baltimore. Had a great time in Baltimore. Just recently, Nashua, New Hampshire. Haven't been to Searchlight yet, but we're going to get there. And everywhere I go,